Hello, today is October 4th, 2025, and that is a somewhat important, if not just a little bit interesting, date for me. It is the 20th anniversary of when I went from being a healthy and well, delightful 10 and a half year old to no longer well, but I think I was still delightful, according to the doctor notes. As much as this might seem like a depressing thing, to me, 20 bonus years is worth celebrating. I had intended on today being able to release a comic that was going to be me sort of going through the different eras in my journey with chronic illness. The working cover I might be showing now. But surprisingly, trying to relive and re remember some very difficult memories, remember them enough to be able to draw in any amount of detail, isn't easy. And amidst everything else going on in this year so far, it did not really seem like high on my priority list. But I am still working on that slowly. To sort of give a TLDR of what will go in the comic, but basically has made up the 20 years, I sort of categorize them into five-ish phases. So the first four-ish years were my middle school years, which I like to think of as my dying phase, or my falling on my face phase, as would probably be less upsetting for my parents. During these years, I was averaging about 80 days in the hospital a year. This was an era when not only did we not really know what was going on, but things seemed to be sort of progressively getting worse. I had seizures, mystery illness, organs going haywire, having to relearn how to walk and move and talk and everything. Not a great time. I think we all knew that I was very fortunate to be having every day that I did, but every day was still a fight and a lot of sacrifice on the part of my family, and it was scary. I went from, again, being a totally healthy and delightful 10-year-old to all of a sudden being in the hospital, sometimes unable to move my entire body or any of my body, being unresponsive overnight, or in the middle of a softball game. During this chaotic time is when the most things just kept changing. For example, at one point, a stomach bug went around my school. Not a big deal. Everyone gets a stomach bug, gets over it. I got the stomach bug, and then instead of fighting the stomach bug, my body decided,
Hey, what if we paralyzed your stomach?
and then it did that permanently. Somehow, I survived middle school. And that brings me into my second phase of illness, which I like to think of as my getting my feet under me phase. This was in high school when I went from, again, roughly 80 days in the hospital a year to only like a week or two in the hospital a year. Luckily, during these years, I finally had a doctor who was able to sort of help manage the doctors. Because before that, and this is for, the kids out there, we didn't always have computers. And by that, I mean, we didn't always have hospital systems that were able to electronically share records and everything. So even within the same exact hospital, we would need to print out all of my hospital records, all of my blood test results, everything. Print everything out and have them in giant binders and bring them from specialist to specialist. And then attempt to clue in each specialist about what all the other specialists are saying and doing and try to manage all of that ourselves. So despite things being a bit more stable and me not being in the hospital as much, there was still a very big question mark about how long that stability was going to last and if I was ever going to be able to go to college. And so there were simultaneously two different concepts in my mind. One was the one that I had since I was 8 years old, which was I'm going to MD, PhD in neuroscience, so I'm going to go to college. And then the other one, which was the probably more realistic, I mean, I might die soon. So, but this mindset is what ended up with me applying to colleges anyway. Honestly, I sent off a lot of the applications when I was bored in the hospital. High school ended with a wild bang because I, in November, was hospitalized and wasn't discharged because they weren't able to stabilize me. And so I was in the hospital for about a month, and every time we tried to get me off the IV fluids and everything, things went nuclear again. And so we went ahead with trying something because at this point it was a Hail Mary because I was like, I don't want to live in the hospital for the rest of my days. I went into that surgery not knowing what I was going to come out with if I came out of it because the surgeon was going to come up with something. So he took all of the pieces of equipment that he could do for different things in with him. And I figured if I woke up, I'll find out. Beggars can't be choosers. I didn't want to die in the hospital. So was sent home with a brand new J-tube. Fingers crossed. And lo and behold, that worked enough for me to be able to slowly stabilize, get back on my feet, literally. Soon thereafter, found out that I had gotten accepted to UCLA, which I applied to as a joke because I thought it would be funny because I hadn't heard of any colleges on the West Coast. So I Googled colleges in California and then applied to the first one to be funny because, again, didn't think that I was walking out of the hospital at that point. My surgeon, who had just given me the J-tube and in theory given my life back to me, he had gone to UCLA and was like, oh my God, go. You gotta go. And so I did. So this brings me into my next phase, which was when I was in college, which I like to call trying to stand on my own. So all of a sudden I am 3,000 miles away from my family, my home, my specialists, and in college. College was surprisingly not easy. The joys of being able to pass as able-bodied, is that even with lots of documentation and doctor's notes, professors in the neuroscience department, which is where I started college, did not want me there. The doctor who had helped me through high school to sort of regain independence, her own life circumstances changed, and so she was no longer able to be there for me after my roughly second year. So I, especially my last 2 years, went from really, really struggling to really, 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 really struggling. I had to retroactively drop out of 2 different quarters. I had to retroactively drop several classes because I would get to finals and would have a flare up, and I would have professors not be willing to do any of my accommodations. And even what was at the time known as the Office for Students with Disabilities, them saying, hey, if your professor doesn't want to do an accommodation, you don't get one. And their own proctoring office saying, hey, you didn't request to have your exam proctored at the beginning of the quarter, so even if your professor says yes, we won't do it. And I kept trying to explain I didn't know I was going to have a health crisis now. So I couldn't have come up with a reason months ago. That didn't matter. The Office for Students with Disabilities said no, as did the professors. So in ignominy, I left. So after trying to stand on my own, emphasis on trying, that brings me into the next phase, which I call falling. Again, after college when I had to figure life out again. Especially during these years, I went from being a little bit stubborn and saying, no, I'm going to get back to UCLA. Next quarter, I'm going to be back. I'm going to be back in the neuroscience department, to realizing that there are certain things about my body that don't let me do the things that I want to do. And so through these years of falling from grace, falling from what I had originally wanted for my life and what the expectations were of MD, PhD, or dying, and trying to come up with what was actually going to be the deal. And trying to make peace with the fact that the world doesn't have a place for people sometimes with broken parts. And realizing that that was something that I want to change. And trying to figure out how I'm going to make that change. Still working on that. And then that brings me to the last phase, which is the roughly 2020 to today phase, which I like to think of as falling. Again, but with style.
That was falling with style.
The irony of this phase is that it starts, as we all know, what happened in 2020, it starts the pandemic, which was horrible. And it gave a really interesting perspective for me to look at the world suddenly becoming extremely accessible for people like me. So I was previously felt very isolated from friends, from social life, from a lot of things in the world, because it was physically difficult for me to be able to attend, to be a part of it. And so all of a sudden, everyone was on Zoom. Hey, that means that I can socialize with my friends equal to how they're socializing with me and everyone else from my bed. That was a horrible time for everybody. Having to argue with a lot of people that and people like me were as important to have in the world as others. And I had people with full smiles on their faces in Zooms say, don't worry, only the disabled will die. And I just had to take that. So this era has gone from, equal access with everybody to suddenly seeing the world open back up, despite COVID still being around and killing lots of people and disabling lots of people every day. I think that I had hoped that eventually, as we moved in the pandemic, especially after 2020, that there would be a greater sense of communal care, community responsibility, and inclusion. And then we actually kind of went the other direction. But hey, capitalism. I was able to go back to college for a year and get a degree in gender studies, which was very exciting and a huge emotional accomplishment that I had already sort of resigned myself to never being able to do. But I was finally able to be in a department that, number one, wanted me to be there, weren't actively trying to get rid of me, and were not only receptive but encouraging of having students trying to come up with the better way for the world to be. So then the end of this phase, coming up to today, after graduating from college finally, is me trying to find a way to help make the world that I want for my community. This actually brings me to why I am sharing this. In this last year, my light said no. This actually brings me to why I am sharing this, especially in the last year, seeing how the disabled and chronically ill community has been targeted and not necessarily been seen amidst all of the struggles going on, particularly the immigrant disabled community and the transgender disabled community. The transgender community has some of the highest rates of chronic illness and neurodivergence and a lot of different conditions that put them in a place of intersection where doing things like removing healthcare from transgender people, including gender affirming care, which is life-saving, is a death sentence for a lot of people. And looking at all of the cuts to Medicaid, a lot of the disabled community can't necessarily work or cannot afford to be paying much higher rates of insurance that we're now going to be seeing. Amidst everything going on, that is being lost in the weeds, which often was what happens. It is the silent majority that is going to, as the great Dr. Fauci said at one point about reopening the country and moving on from COVID.
So you'll find the vulnerable will fall by the wayside. They'll get infected, they'll get hospitalized, and some will die.
And then, of course, there is the significant immigrant demographic that is being so horrifically targeted, and honestly, just at this point, communities of color, where the need for accommodations and understanding with having disabilities, with having chronic illnesses that need to be managed, are being fully forgotten. There are plenty of testimony of people who are currently in ICE camps. There are plenty of stories that are not being talked about enough of people who are being detained by ICE and are not being given their medication. They're not being given enough food. They're not able to sleep because the lights are always on. There are people with cancer who are not being allowed to continue their chemotherapy. There are deaf people being arrested and there is no interpreter there, which of course there's also plenty of people being arrested who don't necessarily speak English as fluently as the officers would want them to, who are not being given an interpreter. But adding another layer of that is when deaf or blind people are being arrested and they are not being given the information that they need to be able to communicate fully. Not to mention that there are illnesses that are spreading in these camps, including, I'm sure, COVID and other conditions, which on their own would be enough to cause life-threatening illness, but when they're not being treated, are ending in deaths. And there's already been a couple, and I'm sure there are more that we don't know about. And with illnesses being spread, especially COVID, which is disabling, not being able to isolate, quarantine, or treat these conditions means that not only are there going to be more deaths, but then also more disability, which again will not be treated or given any accommodations. I'm going to get off my soapbox because this video is going on much longer than I meant it to, but I did want to share this because as much as I try to advocate for including the disabled community, having us be more visible, having us be a part of the world and not one that is sort of accommodated on the side, and at this point, just be a part of the world and not being actively killed off, I realize that I don't necessarily share and talk as much about my own story and my own position within the disabled community to be doing the advocacy as much justice as I would like to. So here's me celebrating 20 years of chronic illness, disability, chaos, 20 years of bonus time that was unearned but is mine. I am very grateful for all of the years that I have gotten. And of course, I can't just celebrate my own survival without ending with some sort of a call to action. So, whenever you are at a social group, a function, an organization's meeting, think about who you're not seeing. Think about what communities are not only not being included, but maybe not even being invited. Are you trying to accommodate without having to be asked to accommodate for specific things? Or are you making sure that it's very clear that we want to have disabled people here, and so we're doing accommodations regardless of how many people even might want to show up who need these accommodations? Are you being upfront with what the accommodations or accessibility barriers might be at your event or meeting or whatever? And are you believing disabled people when they tell you what their needs are, what their life is like? Or are you doing what so many do, and I am myself guilty of, is of looking at somebody and saying, well, you don't look sick. Well, you can't really be that sick and need those accommodations if you look or sound like that. There's actually two things then. So who are you not seeing? But then also, are you believing even if you are not seeing? I don't know if that makes sense, but hooray. I've survived for 20 years more than I thought I would. I am now 30 and a half, and it has been a wild ride. Catch you on the flip side. Bye.